Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm your co-host, Matt Bernico.
And I'm your other co-host, Dean Detloff. Matt, I'm back again. I went across the Atlantic, and then I went across it one more time. And I gotta tell you, I wasn't sure if I was gonna do this. And in the end, I did. I went back like a dog to its vomit to the Bone Church. And I went and I took my wife. And I'm also sorry to report that I guess the two of us are bone perverts. We're a bone pervert couple. And I'm sorry to say it here on the podcast. But I do think the good news is that I can share with you all the bones were in the exact same place that they were in the month before where we went there, which I think is actually very important.
It is so important. If they were moved, it would have been very troubling to hear. Man, Dean, I can't believe you went back. That is such a a hard idea for me to get around. What was it like being back there?
Okay. First of all, second time around, ultimately not as arresting as the first time, as you might suspect, but funnier in some other ways. Because, first of all, you know what's coming. And I think that really adds to the kind of hilarious experience of going through the Franciscan Museum beforehand. That's great. I'm still not convinced. They're completely normal guys, and that's fine. They tried the rest twice. It didn't work. But also, this time around, there was like a theology professor who was there, obviously from the United States, and he had like a group of, I don't know, wide-eyed university students who clearly were pretty excited about the bones, but also like, I don't know, their professor had a real sort of like, he had the vibe of a guy who would use the word winsome too much, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean when I say that?
Boy, do I ever know exactly what you're talking about when you say a guy who says the word winsome too much. Yes, I know that.
He's the kind of guy who would refer to his office as the Shire. Anyway, he's there, and he was talking about St. Francis and the Franciscans in the most annoying way, kind of turning them into like weird evangelicals, but he was obviously Catholic. Anyway, a type of guy for sure. But here's what bothered me the most. Right before, as you'll remember, before you see the bones, there's a variety of icons of signs explaining to you very clearly, without any language, just graphics alone, that despite everything you can do in the Bone Church, the one thing you should not do is talk. You got to be quiet. And this guy was talking through the entire Bone Church so much that my wife and I, we went backwards through the Bone Church back into the museum and waited until he was out to go back through.
You double dipped. Okay.
We double dipped. We double boned. We've seen a lot of bones in there. And all that to say, I think, okay, if you're a guy who uses winsome too much, but you don't know to be quiet in the Bone Church, I feel like that is a huge problem, a huge disconnect. You should not be allowed to take university students anywhere. You can't respect the basic rules of the Bone Church, then the Bone Church is not for you. So basically now, I guess I have to admit that I've become kind of a Bone Church rules purist. And I think if I ever go back to Rome, I'm just going to sit outside of it and kind of shush people. It seems like a lot of people do that around Rome in general. And why not me? It could be me.
Man, I was just thinking, like, okay, it's bad to be a bone pervert. You know, it's not a good thing. We are, but it's just, it's not great. But to be the guy who's like so confident in your knowledge of the Bone Church that you're talking through it is like, that's like a sort of second level bone pervert. Like you're so smugly aware of the Bone Church and all of its great lore that you're just willing to kind of tell people that sucks. That's not good. That does not bear the sort of solemn horniness for bones that we know that we should have when we're in the Bone Church.
Yeah. So that guy, I don't know. He was a bummer, but the rest of it was great, and it was a good experience overall. Also, we toured around all kinds of places. I saw the big Aquinas bone again, all kinds of stuff. Also, though,
oh, nice.
This is the best part. So I went to a church. We went to a church, and you know how you like we said before in Rome, you wander around, you go into a church, you see a dead body, and you didn't expect to see it, but there it is. So we did it again. We went into a church, and immediately in front is a big sign that says, "The foot of Mary Magdalene is in here." And
whoa, all right.
I thought, I mean, obviously I got to see that. But the sad part is that it was in like a museum part of the church that was not open. And in between the sign saying there's a foot in here and the museum that won't let you go see the foot was a like old-timey confessional booth with a priest just sitting in it reading like a newspaper, waiting for people to come confess their sins like in front of everybody in the church. And it was the funniest scene I've ever seen. There's a big sign that says there's a foot in here. Then there's a priest who's like, come confess your sins, who's obviously bored out of his mind because who's going to do that in the middle of the day? And then also a museum that promises there's a foot in there, but you can't see it. It was such a like hilarious kind of scene of delayed gratification. So I didn't see the foot, but I do know where it is. So next time I'll see that foot for sure.
That's the great Catholic design principles at work. They have to put the priest there and the confessional there because the sin is that you want to see the foot.
That is what they need in the Bone Church. They need a confessional right before.
Just to make sure all hearts and minds are clear before you get in there.
Right before and right after, now that I think about it.
Yeah, exactly. All right, folks. That is probably, if this is your first episode of the Magnificast, I'm deeply sorry.
Whoops is what I would say. You made a mistake.
That's right. There's some deep podcast lore going on here if you're not familiar. But Dean's talking about a trip to a crypt in Rome that we've talked about in a previous episode. I don't know. I don't think going back and explaining it now is any better. We've lost you. I'm so sorry. The product has not been constructed properly here. Cool, man. Well, I'm glad you got out there again. You told me also off air that your wife got a different bone t-shirt at the gift shop, and I think that rules. It just has bones on it though, right?
It just has bones. It has different bones than the bones that we got on our bone t-shirts, and it's pretty good. I would say she was very psyched about it. There's a lot of great bone merchandise, even some new bone stuff that had cycled through. There was a bone like mug cozy that I didn't get but kind of regret not getting. So anyway, lots of great bone stuff, and I can't wait to see what they got next year. And we could talk about bones forever, but we're not going to do it. And I do want to instead call attention to another kind of perversion on this podcast, which will set us up for what we're really going to talk about.
Yeah, okay.
And I am just going to put Matt on blast like this, right in front of everybody, in front of God and everybody, in front of the confessional and everything else. So Matt, last week, we couldn't record because I was traveling. And Matt decided to spend that time sort of putting together, if you printed it out, it would be kind of a disconcertingly large file of printed sheets of paper. Just sort of with screenshots of tweets from John Pavlovitz, and I am scrolling through it right now. And I don't think we should maybe we do have to post this sort of screenshot of some of them. You've organized a few of them in tables, which I think is great. I have no idea what the logic is to it per se, but it does look like just sort of stumbling on somebody's like insane conspiracy theory and notes about like one specific incredibly weird Christian who's really upset. And Matt, I think the theme of this episode, first of all, for me, should be that I'm going to need you to explain yourself because this file's just in our podcast folder. And secondly, you're going to have to tell me what we're talking about for this episode because I am ready to be along for the ride, but boy, am I afraid to get in the car.
Before Dean and I started recording, I had the file open. I said, Dean, don't open this, don't look at it. And he did. So you brought this on yourself a little bit. I do like the idea, sort of like a synchronicity of events here, where you're in the deep, dark, dank bone church listening to the man talk. I was in a different deep, dark place of my own making. That is twitter.com, reading John Pavlovitz tweets.
A different kind of.
One that's a lot harder to escape from, for sure. I found myself last week just like looking at this guy's profile for so many reasons, but mostly because I just want to know, like, what is his problem? Is kind of the vibe I was bringing to my investigation. What is your problem? And then by asking that question, I created a problem for myself, which is, I don't know, kind of like, that scene in Neverending Story where Atreyu and his horse are walking through this big swamp, and then the horse just kind of gets sucked into the swamp, and it's all very sad. That's me this week. I'm the horse, and I'm in the swamp, and I can't get out. I think it's so interesting to take a look at John Pavlovitz because he is a Christian liberal thought leader, and he is not taking the U.S. election results very well, as you might imagine. And, you know, at some level, fair enough, John Pavlovitz, I think we're all entitled to our feelings. Being bummed and upset and scared and nervous about the future is all fine. And I feel that too, for sure. But I don't feel it in the same way as John. And I think that's the interesting part. John Pavlovitz is having a very hard time. Let me reiterate that. Just tell you again. I might be in the swamp, but John's already under the muck. He's deep in there. Since the election, I've just been kind of keeping an eye on John Pavlovitz. In case you don't know who that is, by the way, John Pavlovitz is a former pastor, and now he's just sort of like a popular Christian writer and commentator. He was involved in the Christians for Kamala campaign. Is there anything else we should say about John Pavlovitz, Dean? I know that you're in this with me as a person, as a Pavlovitz watcher, but I don't know. Is there anything else he's notable for? I'm trying to think of other things, but it just seems like he's a guy on the internet these days.
Yeah, he is notable for living rent free in my head, I guess. I think you got it. He was a pastor. He has exited that in a certain sense. He wrote a book. It's something like God Doesn't Want You to Be a Jerk or something like that. That's not exactly the title, but it has the word jerk in the title, which I find particularly ironic for reasons I guess we'll sort out later in this podcast. But anyway, to me, my impression of John Pavlovitz is he's actually a very tragic figure, a guy who was basically normal, a regular Christian trying to figure it out. And the light went on at a certain point that maybe conservative Christianity is not for him. Great. Good for him. He had to leave his church. I'm sure that was very hard. But the place where he has landed is like an even more toxic community of basically professional liberals. And I feel like in real time, I have watched John Pavlovitz go from being a normal liberal Christian to being like sucked into brainworm liberal Christian. And I think that is really too bad. That's how I'd sum him up.
Yeah, I think that is right. And I think that's kind of why he's so interesting to me, because he's like a person who is currently descending down that particular rabbit hole, and he's tweeting about it the entire way down. John's reaction to the Democrats losing the election has been like a weird mix of borderline liberal conspiracism and also Christian resistance types of talking points. If you can imagine those two things together, that's what he's been tweeting. And I think that I'm really interested in knowing what's going on with him because he is a thought leader. People do read his content. And I mean, if they don't, then he's spending a lot of time doing nothing. But what John says, I think, will probably inevitably trickle down to what other liberal Christians say and what they think. And I think that is really interesting. And also, I'd be lying if I just didn't think it was extremely funny. And like, I was really curious about it all as well. So in this episode, we are going to talk about John Pavlovitz and like what he's talking about with the election. And we're probably going to use that as a springboard to talk about the bigger question of liberalism and Christianity and politics. So Dean, in my big spreadsheet full of John Pavlovitz tweets, let's start at the top. I want to read to you and then get your reaction to the tweet that he posted as soon as the election was called. Do I have your consent to do that?
Yes, I'm ready to have the full Pavlovitz straight on.
Okay. Most people, well, not most people, but many on the left since the election have done a lot of like sort of postmortem reflection, sort of hindsight is 2020 kind of takes on why the Democrats lost. It's the Democrats abandoned the working class. It's because there was no economic message and so on. All of these kinds of things, you probably have heard them if you've been on the internet, or, maybe you think them yourself, which is fine. We all have thoughts, and that's okay. Except for this one. So John Pavlovitz, right after the election is called, he says this: "As a nation, we collectively failed her. And in doing so, we failed girls and women, the LGBTQ community, people of color, Muslims, Jewish people, immigrants, the sick, the elderly, the people of Ukraine and Gaza, and the planet. It's unthinkable that instead of being able to celebrate a beautiful, hopeful new chapter in the story of this nation with a leader who appealed to the best of our natures, we will instead be holding a postmortem for democracy as we enter the 250th year, stewarded by a malevolent sociopath who despises empathy and shuns the law." Okay, this is since John is handing over piles of cash to Elon Musk to use Twitter, he has like a really big long post, but then towards the end I'll skip down a bit. He says, "There's no way to comprehend or measure how grievous an error this is, but the only thing the decent people of this nation can do is wake up tomorrow and fight like hell for what we still believe is worth the fight, and we will." A strange sentence. And then he says, "I'll be doing that with whoever has the strength to join me. I'm mourning the country we could have had and the one we apparently are, but I refuse to give up believing that compassion is the right path, that diversity makes us better, and that love is greater than fear." So, Dean, what do you think about this this whole thing here?
I am so curious if he himself wrote this or not, to be honest. And this is my own pet conspiracy theory, but I feel like it's also grounded in reality. So, okay, it is true, and I know that it's true. This is how you know it's not a conspiracy theory, because I said that in the beginning. It's true, and I know that it's true, that the Democrats and liberals in general, they'll often kind of seek out influencers and then hire social media managers or kind of handlers, and there are social media campaigns to sort of get everybody on the same message. And it's why you get there's kind of a whole echo chamber of basically the same sentiment that you see from, I don't know, people like Brooklyn Dad Defiant or all these people that I try to avoid on the internet. And I'll have kind of an acerbic, I don't know, edgy, they'll use cuss words vibe to them, but also they'll put asterisks in the cuss words, or they'll sort of say something basically extremely mean, and then in the next tweet be anyway, that's why I think, whatever, the better angels of our nature will prevail. And all that to say, I feel like there's been a rhetorical shift with John Pavlovitz's tweets since he became a crabby Democrat. And it does make me wonder, whether he wrote this in particular or not. I think we could, pull apart all the rhetoric, and I guess we'll do that over time here. But as I said, viewing John as a tragic figure, I have to say, there is something really sad about, seeing an election happen in the United States and believing truly, potentially so hard that, I don't know, Kamala Harris is the best, literally the very best thing that we could get. And people are just so bad in the U.S. that they ultimately decided to vote for Donald Trump instead. There's something very sad about that kind of worldview and that kind of life, and that bums me out for John. I wish that he was a good leftist who could really, dig into the material conditions and, be liberated from all the idealism of kind of Manichaean struggles between political parties in capitalism. But all in all, I feel like he's been sort of sucked in, as you said, into the swamp of the democratic, sort of the crabby democratic apparatus, and it's sad to watch him be ground through the gears.
Yeah, well, if you don't like what he said here, I've got bad news for you, because there's just so much more of the same. First of all, I think that there's something, I mean, I don't know, is John having somebody write his tweets for him? If he is, he should fire them, because this is the worst word salad. I don't like it. I think it's bad. I do imagine, though, he probably has a social media person, because he is churning out kind of a lot of content himself. There's always new blogs. There's always new content. There's also lots of graphics that are going with his blogs that I'm sure he is not sitting down at Canva and making or whatever. So, I'm sure there is somebody behind the scenes. I don't hope they get fired, by the way. I hope that they live a happy and fruitful life writing tweets for John Pavlovitz, and maybe that they will the Holy Spirit will lead them to change his heart or something. I don't know what to say about that. But in the statement itself, I mean, regardless if somebody else wrote it or whatever, there's so much to actually unpack in this way of thinking, and it's hard to know exactly where to start. But I guess at least with this first tweet, I guess the thing I keep coming back to when I think about it is that, for John, the problem is not that the United States political economy is founded on, naturalized genocide, chattel slavery, capitalist exploitation, and on, right? It's not that the problem is not the sort of bedrock of oppression in the United States, but the problem instead is some mean-spirited people who won't let the country move on towards a new hopeful chapter. And I think that is kind of peculiar. A weird thing to actually think about people, that it's just well, the problem isn't, anything structural or sociological or psychological. It's just that some people are really mean and evil, and that is the real problem. And that is a theme that runs throughout John's tweets and writing. I've got a bunch of his blogs in here as well. And anyways, so I think that there's actually something really interesting in all of this. and there's a way that his Christianity is like really bleeding through in some of these observations, where it's not just like a liberal ideology, but since it's a Christian liberal ideology, there's a lot of like conflation of evil and political opponents and like people who are morally wrong and also who are like, you know, Trump supporters. There's these conflations of these big ethical categories that you'd find in Christianity, and the lines get very blurred when it comes to how he applies them to more political types of thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's kind of the weird thing about this brand of Christian influencer in particular, is that it like, you know, it absorbs a certain kind of Christian theology that is actually pretty thin, you know, like the idea is like, I don't know, don't be a jerk. That's the sum total of Christianity. Be nice to other people. God loves you, and that's kind of the end. And I do think that, I mean, that is preferable for sure to the like outright Christo-fascist right-wing theologies that are gaining popularity right now. I mean, a little diversity is great. That's fine. But the kind of distinction that I think you really see here is this versus something like liberation theology, which has an assumption that like your theological imagination should also drive your politics to demand something more, to not accommodate so readily to such a bad world. And I think that to me is what's so fascinating about the kind of theological valence that happens in liberalism, that you get this like thin theology that gloms on to it allows the politics to sort of drive the ship. And so you end up having this like strangely intense, like metaphysically dualistic understanding of politics, but you have no like you like get rid of the theological horizon that would allow you to imagine a world where like, I don't know, your choices aren't between two people who think that Israel should just do whatever it wants to Palestinians. Like that is such a wild kind of thing. I don't know, a weird sort of trajectory for a pastor.
It is very strange, but there is a very bizarre theological element mixed up in it, and we'll see that kind of coming out over and over again, I think. Before we get to some of the overt theological themes in John's reaction, I feel like I'm bringing like a criticism of a deep philosophical text, but really it's just a dude's tweets that are like getting increasingly unhinged over time. Okay, before we get to some of the more like overtly theological topics, though, I do have to tell you about some tweets that he did make that I think will help you, like that gives a bit more texture to the theology that is going on here. This is from the 14th of November, after the election's called, obviously. I don't know if you recall what it was like to be on Twitter or whatever, social media in general around this time. It was bad. People were, you know, again, like testing out their theories, talking amongst themselves about where the Democrats went wrong, all this kind of stuff. And John says this: "Stop. This isn't their fault. They served us faithfully, competently, and responsibly. They pulled us out of a terrible inflation left by their predecessors, helped us recover from a brutal pandemic, and gave us stability following a violent insurrection." The tweet goes on, and it's quite long, and I'm not going to read the rest of it, but this is the theme.
Just to pause, what I do appreciate about it is you have screenshotted it, including the show more button, clearly indicating you didn't click it, but also including the picture of Harris and Biden. I mean, it belongs in the MoMA, your particular curation of Pavlovitz.
Yeah, I think it's pretty good. A troubling gif of Kamala Harris laughing maniacally. Okay, so anyways, that's the vibe. It's not their fault. Here's another one. This is actually a really recent tweet that's kind of carrying some of these same vibes, but it came today on November 26th, so it has a little bit more, I don't know, maturity of the moment to it. John says, "This election result isn't about Dem messaging. Their messaging during the campaign was pitch perfect in any other iteration of America."
Whoa.
I know. It was really good, I guess. That's what he says.
I guess I just didn't say
I guess my ears are broken. And then he says, "It was about helping the middle class, lowering taxes for the average American, continuing with sound economic policies to cut rising grocery prices, preserving democracy, taxing the wealthy, affordable healthcare and education, the rights of women, strengthening the border, unity, opportunity." Man, I gotta tell you, if that was the message, I think things might be a bit different, but who knows? And then he says, "This election result isn't about policy or about platform. It's about racism, misogyny, and a lack of education, and a right-wing media machine that caters to those realities. There's no messaging strategy that can overcome deeply held prejudice and rising ignorance. And those two factors are the only explanation for someone like Donald Trump even being the nominee, let alone getting the 76 million votes. So the first tweet was from the 14th of November. This is from the 26th. And you can see those same themes kind of evolving over time. It's not the Democrats' fault. And if you say that, you're wrong. It's actually just about the racism of people who voted for Donald Trump. It's about their prejudice. It's about their hate. And that is it. And there's nothing else to it because their messaging was perfect. There's a level of commitment to the bit about the Democrats like being like blameless that I think is like so fascinating. Like the inability for self-reflection, for like thinking, well, maybe they could have done this differently, or maybe like whatever. It's not even here, right? It's not like this is like not even good faith. It's just like worshipful. I don't know. It's kind of bizarre.
It's very bizarre. It's especially bizarre, too, because, I mean, I think what's really fascinating about the fallout of the loss by the Democrats and even the lead up to it is that there was, like, often the Democrats seem to project a sort of, like, enclosed in-group, and then there are some exceptions to that, right? So you have, like, whatever, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and all these sort of establishment Democrats who basically all agree on essentials, and they kind of get their way in the party with candidates and policies, etc. And then you have these outliers like Bernie Sanders or, I don't know, whoever, the Squad, etc. These people who like make Nancy Pelosi mad every once in a while. And for the most part, those people get disciplined pretty readily and handily, and, you know, they're just dealt with. But you don't see a lot of fissures within the kind of, like, ruling clique of the Democratic Party. Or at least I don't. Maybe there's, like, some extremely nerdy political bloggers out there who do. Good for you guys, but I don't. And I think what was really fascinating about the kind of lead up to Harris replacing Biden is that you started to see some cracks even internally in the edifice, right? Like Nancy Pelosi was out there being like, get out of here, Joe Biden. You had the kind of slow warming over of a handful of holdouts for a while. And that sort of process was kind of intriguing. But then there was this like rapid snap back to kind of unqualified and total support for Harris, despite no public mandate from anybody that is who they wanted per se. You know, that point's been made to death. But I think what's really fascinating about a person like Pavlovitz, but also the sort of army of Democratic influencers on the internet, is that there's really no room even for the kind of creativity of thought that would allow you to entertain the possibility that even Nancy Pelosi herself is entertaining, that maybe they picked the wrong horse, you know, and it's time to like place a different bet. And instead, all you can ever do is basically wait for the Democrats to sort of tell you what to think and then double down on it so hard. And I think at a certain point, it probably becomes a bit of a sunk cost issue. Like, you know, the stakes of Pavlovitz's world, the world that he's built, are so high and so absolute and so clear and obvious that to kind of like buck that, even if you were bucking it in line with other Democrats, would basically cause your like worldview to crumble. I feel, you know, it's like it's a metaphysical reality that gets constructed by sort of following whatever kind of line comes down from the most boring like democratic decisions that could be made. And I think that is actually really fascinating and instructive because there's a kind of way in which like liberalism as a form of idealism, you know, it is strictly disinterested in material reality, and it would prefer to kind of retreat into the comfort of like a narrative that makes sure that you're always a good guy and you've always been the good guys. And I imagine that's like a pretty tough shell to crack. It's a tough place to be.
Yeah, I think that doubling down and sunk cost fallacy is playing a big role here, but I don't know. It does seem like there is a weird like. There's an amount of delusion to this as well. That is, you know, like a true believer type of delusion, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Maybe just to push that point about being a true believer and also demonstrating, like, I guess where John Pavlovitz is mentally in some of this is this was earlier in November after the election. John Pavlovitz was tweeting quite a bit about recounts and sort of a suspicion he had about, I don't know, things being off in terms of actual vote counts. And it is, okay, I'll just read the tweet. I'll just read it. It's damning enough. Dear Kamala Harris, I keep receiving emails asking for donations toward congressional race recounts. While there is no mention of swing state recounts, I will gladly contribute to the latter efforts and hope you will initiate a challenge to ensure accurate tabulation. I guess this is so sad to me because, like, donating to the Democratic Party before an election takes place is sad enough, but I understand why people do it. Politicians need money to run on, I guess, and you want the lesser of the evil to win. Okay, whatever. But but saying that you will give a politician money after an election is over and they've lost is so sad to me. There's something very, very sad about that. Like, come on, bud. But I guess I brought this tweet out to highlight two things. One, he's talking about what he can do as an individual to help in this particular moment, which is to give money to recounts, and also like really staking a claim in the idea that the problem, again, like maybe it's not even a real problem. Maybe it's just maybe it's inaccurate counting. Maybe there's something even fishier going on here. There's a few other tweets where he kind of points in a more conspiratorial direction about what he thinks happened in the election. But we don't need to get into it. Some of it's like, some of it's just shitposting and some of it is maybe more serious. I don't know. But I guess I'm really intrigued by his sustained use of the combination of like, this isn't their fault type of language, and also like the things that I can do language, the how I'm in the fight language. It's a weird expression of like liberal mythology that at the end of the day, everything is really just up to the choice of individuals. And in this election, there are the good individuals like John and the people who are good in America or whatever, and the bad ones who do bad things that have hate in their heart and who are, the source of evil or whatever. And that is such that's liberalism through and through, I guess, is it? Like, it's all up to individuals. It is their fault only. And if you voted for this is what you should get. And, unwilling to think about all of the unmotivated voters in the world, unwilling to think about the like sociopolitical and socioeconomic reasons that people might, vote for Donald Trump, the ways that media impacts people, the sort of like bigger problems around political engagement and political education. These are all like things that are outside of John Pavlovitz's particular worldview, or at least he doesn't tweet about them as being possible explanations. John isn't dumb. Like he probably knows about these things, but in his sort of public facing content, it is always just like, there are some people who are good in America and want it to make it a good place, and there's some people who are evil, and like that's and they've chosen this as kind of the end of the story for most of his comments. It made me think a lot of a book that we read a really long time ago on the podcast from Adam Kotzko. He wrote a book called Neoliberal Demons, and it's a cool political theology book that I got to tell you is a little bit too smart for me in most instances. But there's like the main argument is that like within Christianity and within neoliberalism, there's a sense of we're choosing to rebel against God. We're choosing what is evil. We're like the demonization that we might feel by a system is actually our own wrongdoing. And I think that there's a lot of that in John's tweets and his thought that I think is quite troubling. And it's one of those moments I think is worth kind of bringing some attention to, because it's really where you see the fabrics of theology and politics really blending together in some like close ways. So let me read this bit from Adam Kotzko's book, and like maybe we can make some more sense of John from a more more philosophical vantage point. So this is from Adam Kotzko's book. The devil freely chose to rebel against God. This claim serves as the foundation of a moral paradigm in which freedom, far from being the basis of creaturely dignity or fellowship with God, is thought exclusively as a mechanism for generating blameworthiness. I designated this form of moral entrapment as demonization, in recognition of the fact that it is the means by which God generates demons within the theological system itself. And I argue that modernity inherited this demonizing notion of freedom as blameworthiness and laid it as the foundation of its own strategies of self-legitimation. Neoliberalism makes demons of us all, confronting us with forced choices that serve to direct the blame for social problems onto the ostensible poor decision-making of individuals. So I don't want to say people have no agency or whatever, right? That's not necessarily the case. But I guess the point is that there's this like liberal way of thinking about the world and of ethics and of blame that demonize individuals over and above everything else. And John Pavlovitz is doing it constantly in the way that he blames individual people for just being kind of evil, rather than kind of thinking about, the other reasons that people might have done this. I don't know. I think that the demonization thing is actually quite useful, though, because it helps you kind of sidestep away from the, a majority of the country is actually just evil people, and helps you think a bit more critically about painting with such broad a brush about like the ethics and morality of individual people. I don't know. I think that if people vote for Trump, that sucks. But, there are ways to make sense of this, and like, there are ways to make sense of why people did what they did with regard to voting for Trump that are actually helpful for like understanding not only that situation, but future situations going forward. And I think that, if you're a person who is reasonable and responsible and intelligent, you might investigate those a bit more than just like saying that they're evil or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it is absurd. Like, I understand the impulse to be like, I don't know, there's a lot of bad people out there and they want bad stuff. And like, there's a part of me that thinks that's true. And that sucks. Like, we live in a bad world and bad people make it. And that's too bad. I think that's like there's a deep Christianity to that logic that I really am sensitive to. But at the same time, like, especially when it comes to kind of liberals making Trump voters out to be the demons, and not only them too. I mean, as a sad Pavlovitz watcher, I know that he also, will find all kinds of people to demonize, people who voted for a third party, people who didn't vote at all, people who voted uncommitted in the primaries, all these kinds of people who didn't do their job, the job being voting for Kamala Harris and being excited about that. And I think that what's really fascinating about that is there's never, as you said, this kind of moment of self-criticism to like turn around and be like, why did people do that? But there's also this just like complete refusal to want to like make sense of the world in a way that isn't like kind of insane. Like, it's kind of insane to just be like, all these people, the vast majority of people, whether they voted or didn't vote or whatever, are just like so severely stupid and evil and wrong and bad, as opposed to like the small remnant of liberals who went out of their way to vote for Kamala. And what I find really fascinating is, like, I mean, I get it. People who vote for Donald Trump, I think that sucks. I don't think they should do it. And, that, like, sometimes I struggle to understand why they did it as well. There's probably a bajillion reasons. But because I am from a rural place in the United States and have a lot of, friends and family and all that kind of stuff, and I'm shaped by that experience, like, I've had lots of conversations with people who voted for Donald Trump where I've just asked them why. And with no real desire to like change their mind. I'm just like morbidly curious, why did they do that if they had to explain it? And what I think is so fascinating is every time somebody talks to me about it, I almost always think like, man, the left is really doing a bad job out here. Like, for example, like, I'll talk with somebody, I won't say who these people are. I've talked to somebody important to me who was like, yeah, in the 2016 election, I voted for Donald Trump. Because I wanted to shake things up, because out here in rural Michigan, nobody thinks about us and the system's not working for us. And I think that's bad. And I said, that makes sense to me. It is bad. And I understand why you'd want to shake stuff up. And I had asked if it had been a contest between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, would you have voted differently? And this person said, whoa, I really would have had to think very hard about it. And I didn't have to think hard about this vote at all. And like, that is an unfortunate calculus, but makes total sense to me, and is also an opening for people on the left. Or it's the same with like talking to people who, I don't know, are like really mad about immigrants or something, and at the same time, that if like an immigrant showed up on their doorstep, they would like do whatever they could to help them out, confronted with an actual person in front of them, etc. And I don't think that like people should bend over backwards to become like Trump voter whisperers or kind of be like overly sympathetic to Trump voters. Like I think there's a danger in that for sure, and a kind of naivete to that in its own way. But I do think like whenever I talk to somebody who made that choice, my curiosity is always like, I wonder how you could deprogram this person, and I wonder what they feel their self-interests are that are not being met by voting for Democrats. And 9 times out of 10, like, they're pretty right that the Democrats don't care about them. They are not going to help them out. All that kind of stuff is totally true. And the question is like, okay, how do you reroute that kind of, felt reality into something else? And it's an indictment of the left and of liberalism, but also the left, I think, that people, they would rather go with like some insane billionaire president surrounded by insane billionaire cabinet people than, I don't know, go like learn about solidarity. Yeah. And that's the indictment that you can't make if you live in that metaphysical world, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I mean, I think it's a harder thing to do, I think, from the left too, because, for so many people, political engagement means voting every 4 years or whatever. And the things that the left would ask you to do if they were out organizing a rural community in Michigan or whatever would be really hard things to do. Things that, the system that they live within doesn't want them to do in the first place, like organizing their workplace or, doing solidarity stuff or mutual aid stuff, whatever. It's a harder ask than just like vote for somebody for president or whatever. I guess all of that to say, like, I mean, I think that your assessment is correct. The left should be doing more. There's so much going on. I think there's also something to say too, like the problems that I'm drawing out of John Pavlovitz are not like John Pavlovitz specific problems, and there's nothing necessarily like wrong with him in particular. He's just the person being loudest about it in my particular corner of the internet, I guess. Is my problem. There are also just like there are reasons that people are doing the calculus of being a Trump supporter. There are also reasons that John is doing what he is doing, but they're like different reasons, like, engagement farming and like trying to get following online or whatever. Yeah, quite different. I have so much other content, Dean. I have 2 other blogs I put in this that I was thinking maybe this isn't enough content, but now I'm thinking, oh no, it's way too much. We're not going to talk about the blogs, but it's more of the same, honestly. There's one blog about how Trump supporters, they think this is a great victory, but they don't know what they've got coming for them. And then there's another blog where he says that a thumbs up for Donald Trump is a middle finger to Jesus Christ. So cool stuff. Some great one-liners from John. But maybe we can like round up the conversation the last 15 minutes or so with maybe like a bigger look at just like what is this? What is the problem? why are liberals like this? Is maybe the question I would like to consider more deeply. There's a lot of different ways maybe we could tackle that question, but something I've been thinking a lot about lately is the way that Tad DeLay writes about it in his book, The Future of Denial. He has a chapter in there called What Does the Liberal Want? And Tad is always asking this question. What does the conservative want? What does the evangelical want? What do liberals want? And I think those are great questions because it's like, what are you actually getting out of this whole sort of rigmarole that you are putting people through on the internet and that you're like, espousing yourself? It's just a lot. So I'll kind of like maybe recap a bit of what Tad says in his book, and we can talk through it and in terms of like what we think. But basically in Tad's book, he says that conservatives always get like a lot of hate because it's just like, it's all id all the way down with conservatives, right? That's like all you get. You get somebody who's being crass and rude and just telling you like, I'm gonna do bad things is what conservatives do. In Tad's book, he kind of goes out of his way to say, like, conservatives are out there telling you that they're going to, drill baby drill. They're going to do whatever it takes to gain oil independence or energy independence in the United States or whatever. And then he says liberals, on the other hand, they just say it in a nicer way. That's kind of what it comes down to. So, if Sarah Palin or whoever is saying drill baby drill, Joe Biden's just out there saying, I don't rule out fracking altogether or something, like basically what this means is like more oil and gas, more pollution and emissions, like, but it's 2 politicians who are supposed to be diametrically opposed, but they're both kind of saying the same thing. And I guess like that's kind of a highlight that we've alluded to a few times in this podcast and also in other podcasts too, right? That like Donald Trump is bad. Yeah, totally. No argument for me. But also like the program of the Democrats is not good. It's just like a slightly kinder version of that bad conservative program. Just different sort of degrees of bad, I guess is how you might put it. There's still sort of the deportation of immigrants. There's the incarceration of immigrants. There's the continued mass incarceration of other people in the United States. There's an ongoing genocide. There's complicity in, the arms trade within it, all this kind of stuff. And these are both parties doing these things, right? But they're kind of just saying them in different ways. So conservatives are always happy to say the quiet part out loud, but liberals who want, nearly the same thing have to go through the motions of moral supremacy, I guess is my concluding idea, right? That liberals believe that like everyone should have equal respect. They should have dignity under the law. Liberals believe things like workers shouldn't be exploited at work. They believe in the science of climate change, but they also do not fundamentally believe in changing the status quo. It's kind of like it is a weird delusion where they think like, man, it would be nice if the world was a more just and kind place. But if that requires me, a liberal, to choose a side, I will just consider it politely and then not do anything at all because I don't want to alienate my base or lose potential right-wing converts that, exist in my brain. And I guess what all this comes down to and why someone like John Pavlovitz is important for liberalism as like a political movement, if you can call it that, I don't really know, is that liberalism requires sources of like legitimacy that stem from places like established political norms and also religious values. That's where John's kind of coming in. He has the religious values because he has got this sort of like ex-pastor vibe to himself. A liberal Christian that like aligns with the Harris campaign provides a moral foundation for that political project, for the political project of, I think, the Democratic Party, liberalism in general. It's a foundation that can say that, we actually do believe in a better world, right? It's a voice within the coalition behind people like Kamala Harris. In another 4 years, it might be her again, or it might be somebody different. Who knows? But, that voice can say, we are a religious minority of people, I guess, who are like evangelicals for Harris or Christians for Harris or whatever. We believe that a better world is possible and that voting Democrat is a, more Christian approach or whatever. So we're going to throw our weight behind that particular movement or whatever, right? It's providing that it's providing a little bit of like moral vision making for liberals while also like fundamentally falling behind them when, it comes to actual politics. So when it comes to like what liberals want, I don't know. I don't know what they want. I guess it's just they want that feeling of moral clarity or moral supremacy over another group of people, even though they really want basically the same things in the world. So I guess that's the concluding point I have, that what liberals want is not politics, really. It's not justice. It's just like supremacy. It's moral supremacy over some other group of people. It's smugness. It's the ability to have a group of people on Twitter say mean things about another group of people on Twitter.
I like that you've established a kind of horseshoe theory for liberalism. I think that's great. And the fact that it is based on a kind of superiority complex seems right to me. It's like a deceptively overly simple point to say, oh, these people are ultimately the same. Or, we've talked in this podcast before about like Christian nationalism. It's bad on the right, but guess what? It's also bad on the left because there's a kind of Christian nationalism you see in Biden or here in John Pavlovitz. I think that is all true, but it's deceptively simple because there is a sort of important truth to it, especially as you're putting it now. Like, it never occurred to me to sort of see it as a unity in the form of a vision of superiority over others based in a kind of moral code. And obviously, like, that is a disease that is extremely rampant on the left as well. No doubt about that. None of us are immune, for sure. I'm doing it right now. But I think, like, there is something important about saying the sort of unifying factors that make liberals and conservatives ultimately products of capitalism, just sort of with like, some different ideas of who they're superior to, is really essential for also figuring out what's the like deep counter logic of solidarity in itself, or even of like a kind of Christian leftist vision. Like, I do think the naivete of Christianity that I like is that ultimately you're trying to build a world where everybody can figure out how to live together, and there's a sense of justice and reconciliation that's operative there. Like, we've talked about the Sandinistas so much, but I really do think that's such an instructive example, right? Like, after the revolution, they don't kill all these people that they round up or whatever on purpose. They abolish the death penalty. And I mean, years and years ago, we read a really wild book about all these U.S. Christians who went to Nicaragua to tour it around. And their conclusion was that it was a society built on what they called revolutionary forgiveness, the title of the book. And the idea being that, like, even in a society so polarized that you would have a civil war, the revolution's bet is that, like, against the dictatorship, you would build a society where even the torturer could have a place in the end. Like, you have to, like, definitely go through some stuff to get there. You gotta be educated, etc. That it's not a free pass. Justice is important as well in Sandinista kind of social thinking. But the idea being that the left and Christianity kind of hold out this vision for another world where hopefully everybody can fit, even if it's not in the same way. Just seems like, yeah, a really important kind of commitment when everybody's trying to be pissed off at each other and not really figure out why things are so bad.
Yeah, I guess that's something that really bothers me about John Pavlovitz in particular, is that he uses some of that language, about Christianity, right, and the another world is possible kind of language. He cashes in on some of that in his rhetoric, but he doesn't mean it in a way that is meaningful. He means it in a really shallow kind of way where it's like, well, there's a future where if people just weren't so evil that we could have a great Democratic president. And it's like, if that is your terminal point, is having the Democrats in charge, another world is not possible. That is a bad world. It's still a pretty bad one. Well, whatever. It's not exactly the same as having awful Republicans in charge. That's totally true. There are degrees of difference, but it's not an exit from capitalism. It's not an end to exploitation. It's, at the end of the day, I think, moral superiority.
Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/themagnificast. If you do that at $2 or more, you can join our Discord where everybody's talking about all kinds of interesting stuff. Today, what are we talking about? Some interesting theological discussions about whether or not God changes or makes mistakes. Anyway, not the greatest advertisement for a Discord you should join, but trust me, there's more interesting stuff happening there. It's a great place. Everybody's super nice and really fun and goofy, and it's a nice little corner of the internet that we have managed to carve out with so many other folks.
We also just finished reading a book together by Andreas Malm, new book called Overshoot. That was pretty cool. So there's like maybe 3 or 4 of us that read the whole book and talked about it every 2 weeks. And I don't know, we do those kinds of things every now and again because the great members of the Discord organize it, and we don't. It's great. You could be a part of that too.
That's right. It's great. You should be part of it. Our music is by Amari Armstrong. Our outro is by the Illogical Spoon, and we'll see you next week.
Get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up. Keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. Oh, don't mind a cold night, but we might